It was still dark when the sound came. Not loud, not angry, just firm enough to pull him out of sleep. He lay still for a moment, unsure if it was part of a dream. The clock beside the bed glowed 5 a.m. The knock came again, slow and careful, like someone who did not want to wake the whole house. He sat up, heart already moving faster than it should at that hour. No one ever knocked that early. Friends would call. Family would text. This was different. He listened for voices, for footsteps, for anything that might explain it. There was only the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock. The knock came a third time. Closer now, sharper, real. He pulled on a shirt and walked down the short hallway. The floor felt cold under his feet. He hesitated at the door, resting his hand on the handle, trying to guess who could be on the other side. Through the peephole, he saw his neighbor standing on the porch. The sight alone was strange. The neighbor was usually neat, calm, and predictable. Always polite, always on schedule. But now the neighbor stood there, with shoulders tight, hair uncombed, eyes darting toward the street. One hand kept rubbing the other like it was trying to wipe something away. He opened the door just a little. "Is everything okay?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The neighbor looked up quickly, almost startled, then forced a small smile that did not last. "I'm sorry to wake you," the neighbor said. "I wouldn't come this early if it wasn't important." The voice sounded thin, rushed. Not the steady tone he was used to. He opened the door wider. Cool morning air slipped inside. "What's going on?" The neighbor took a step closer, lowering the voice even more. "I need a favor. Just a small one. It won't take long." That was the first moment something felt wrong. Small favors did not require secret voices at 5 a.m. He glanced past the neighbor, down the empty street. Everything looked normal. Houses asleep. No cars moving. No signs of trouble. "What kind of favor?" he asked. The neighbor swallowed. "I need you to hold on to something for me. Just for a few hours. By midday, I'll come get it. No one needs to know." The words landed heavier than they should have. Hold on to something. No one needs to know. He felt a tight pull in his chest. "Why?" he asked. The neighbor hesitated too long. "It's complicated." That answer should have been enough to close the door. He knew that. But years of living next to this person had built a quiet trust. Borrowed tools. Short conversations over the fence. Shared complaints about weather and noise. Nothing had ever felt off before. "What is it?" he asked again. The neighbor reached into a bag and pulled out a small wrapped bundle. Not big, not heavy. Wrapped in an old cloth and taped tight. The neighbor held it like it mattered too much. "Please," the neighbor said. "I just need a little time." He looked at the bundle, then back at the neighbor's face. The eyes were wide now, almost pleading. There was fear there. Real fear. "Is this going to get me in trouble?" he asked. The neighbor shook the head quickly. "No, I wouldn't do that to you. I promise." Promises made in the dark feel different. They sound weaker. Less solid. He should have said no. He thought of all the reasons not to get involved. But he also thought of how alone the neighbor looked, standing there at dawn, asking for help like it was the last option left. "Just until midday?" he asked. "Yes," the neighbor said fast. "I swear." He took the bundle. It felt heavier than it looked. The cloth was rough against his skin. The neighbor let out a breath, like someone who had been holding it too long. "Thank you," the neighbor said. "You don't know how much this means." "I don't even know what it is," he replied. "That's better," the neighbor said quietly. Those words stayed with him as the neighbor stepped back. Already turning away? Halfway down the steps, the neighbor stopped and looked back. "Please don't open it," the neighbor said. Then the neighbor walked away. Disappearing into the early morning shadows, he closed the door and locked it without thinking. The house felt different now, like it was holding a secret it did not want. He stood there for a moment, holding the bundle, listening to his own breathing. He placed it on the kitchen table and stared at it. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Sleep was gone. He made coffee even though he didn't want it. His hands shook slightly as he poured water into the machine. Every sound felt too loud. He kept glancing at the window, expecting to see someone watching. The bundle sat there, quiet and still. He told himself not to imagine what was inside. But the mind does what it wants, especially when fear opens the door. He sat down and checked his phone. No messages. No missed calls. Just a normal morning for everyone else. By the time the sun began to rise, he already regretted saying yes. As light filled the room, he noticed small things he had missed before. The cloth around the bundle was stained. Not badly, but enough to make him uneasy. The tape was old, layered like it had been used more than once. He stood up and moved the bundle into a cabinet, out of sight. He told himself that hiding it did not mean guilt. It just meant caution. He tried to distract himself with routine. Shower, clean clothes. Breakfast he barely touched. But his thoughts kept circling back to the knock, the voice, the eyes that would not meet his. Around 7, he heard movement outside. Doors opening. Cars starting. Life waking up. He peeked through the window and saw the neighbor's house. Curtains closed. No lights. No sign of movement? That was unusual. The neighbor was always up early. He checked the cabinet again, just to make sure the bundle was still there. It was silent, waiting. He wondered if the neighbor was okay, or if something had already gone wrong. At 8, his phone buzzed. A message from work asking if he could come in earlier than planned. He stared at the screen, feeling annoyed and relieved at the same time. Work meant distraction, but leaving the house meant leaving the bundle alone. He replied that he would be in soon, before leaving. He stood in the kitchen again, listening. Everything felt normal, and that made it worse. If something bad was coming, it was hiding behind normal sounds and bright morning light. He locked the cabinet, even though it wasn't necessary. Then he locked the door behind him and stepped outside. The street looked peaceful. Birds on wires. A breeze moving tree leaves. The neighbor's house remained quiet, blinds still drawn. As he walked to his car, a thought hit him hard. He realized he did not know the neighbor as well as he thought. Maybe none of them really knew each other. Maybe they only knew the versions shown in daylight. He drove away, checking his mirror more than usual by the time he reached work. The strange visit already felt unreal, like something that happened in another life. But the weight in his chest stayed. He knew this was only the beginning of something he did not understand yet. At exactly 9:15, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message with no words. Just a missed call notification from the neighbor. He stared at it for a long moment. Outside, the morning moved on like nothing had happened. Inside, he felt the quiet sense that the day was about to break open, and that a single knock at 5 a.m. had already changed everything. The morning moved slowly, but he could not shake the feeling that something was off. The bundle from the neighbor sat quietly in the cabinet, but it seemed louder in his mind than anything else in the house. Every creak of the floor, every distant sound outside made him glance over his shoulder. He tried to get on with his day. Work emails, a call from a client, even a small task he had been putting off for weeks. But none of it mattered. His thoughts kept circling back to the knock at 5 a.m. in the bundle. He kept imagining what could be inside, even though he had promised himself not to open it. Every image was worse than the last. Around mid-morning, he decided to check on the neighborhood. Not the bundle, just the outside. He stepped onto the porch and looked toward the neighbor's house. Curtains were still closed. Not a sound. Usually, at this hour, the neighbor would be tending the small garden in front or sweeping the steps. Today, nothing. He felt a pull of worry, mixed with something else he couldn't name. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the strange sense that he had been dragged into a story he did not belong in. The street looked normal. The sun was higher now, soft and warm. But the quiet seemed unnatural. He returned inside, trying to focus on ordinary things. He watered the small plants on the windowsill, cleaned the counter, and even tried listening to music. But the songs sounded hollow. His mind kept returning to the bundle. He sat down again at the kitchen table, staring at the cabinet. Minutes passed. Slowly, tiny doubts crept in. What if the neighbor was not being honest? What if he was holding on to something dangerous? He could feel the questions building, but he did not want to confront them. His phone buzzed. Another message, this time from a coworker, inviting him to a mid-morning call. He answered mechanically, nodding at the screen, even though no one could see him. The conversation felt distant, unimportant. He could not focus on numbers, projects, or deadlines. Only the early visit and the silent bundle occupied his mind. At around 10 o'clock, there was a sudden knock at the door. His heart jumped again. It was different this time. Quicker, sharper, almost impatient. He hesitated, hand hovering over the handle. Slowly, he opened the door a crack. It was another neighbor, someone he rarely spoke to. "Hi," the person said, smiling, but the eyes were serious. "I just wanted to ask, have you seen the other neighbor today? He didn't come out this morning." No," he said. "I haven't." The person frowned. "That's strange. He's usually outside by now." He didn't answer my call either. Chill ran down his spine. He said nothing more, and the neighbor left. He closed the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. The idea that something could be wrong began to settle into his mind. Maybe the small bag, the early visit. The strange request had all meant something bigger than he had realized. He went back to the cabinet, examining the bundle. Every small detail felt different. The cloth seemed rougher than before. He noticed a faint stain he hadn't seen in the dark. The tape seemed older, wrinkled, worn. The weight felt unusual, heavier than he remembered. A knot of anxiety tightened in his chest. He tried to think logically. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe the neighbor simply had a personal problem and needed help. But the fear in the eyes that morning, the way the voice trembled, the way the neighbor had looked over the street repeatedly, it did not leave him. He glanced at the clock. 10:30, mid-morning, only a few hours until midday, and the neighbor promised to return. But the neighbor's house was still silent. A thought crossed his mind. What if the neighbor didn't come back? What would happen then? As he paced the room, he noticed small things that had gone unnoticed before. A bicycle leaning against the fence next door, slightly tilted. A newspaper in front of the neighbor's house, untouched. The mail still stacked by the door. Everything was still, almost frozen. Normal in appearance, but wrong somehow. He picked up the bundle, turning it over in his hands. The weight shifted slightly. He tried to recall what it felt like when the neighbor handed it over. The nervousness, the urgency, the subtle fear that had hidden behind polite words. He remembered the neighbor's eyes. Wide, almost panicked. The hand that rubbed the other hand repeatedly. The way the neighbor looked down the street, then back at him. Something about it made him uneasy. Something felt like a warning. He set the bundle down gently, unsure whether to leave it there or move it somewhere else. He moved it to the far corner of the counter, away from windows and doors, hoping that would make it safer. He checked it every few minutes, unable to stop himself. At 11, he got a call from a distant family member. The conversation was casual, about plans for the weekend, but he could barely respond. His mind was elsewhere, tangled in what had happened that morning. In the fear that something bad might already be unfolding, he hung up and walked to the living room. Peering through the blinds at the neighbor's house again, still nothing. The street remained quiet, peaceful, but he could not shake the sense of unease. Around 11:30, he noticed movement across the street. A car pulling out slowly, a figure walking hurriedly down the sidewalk. He squinted. It was the neighbor, leaving the house, carrying nothing, moving quickly, almost in a rush. The neighbor looked around nervously, then disappeared behind the corner. His chest tightened. The bundle. Why had the neighbor left? The neighbor had promised to return by midday. Had something happened? Was it too late? He stared at the cabinet, feeling trapped. The quiet weight of the bundle pressed on him in ways that were not physical. Anxiety, worry, and fear wrapped around him. Time seemed to move faster and slower at the same time. He made a cup of tea, hoping the ritual would calm him. He sat by the window, sipping slowly, watching the street. He noticed small details, the way the sunlight hit the pavement, a bird landing on a wire, a leaf blowing past. Each tiny movement reminded him of how normal everything seemed. While inside, he felt anything but normal. He checked the bundle again. It had not moved. The cloth still held the shape of what was inside, but he could not see it. He could only imagine. The imagination made the weight heavier. No one came. The neighbor did not return. The clock ticked relentlessly. 11-40-5. The minutes felt like hours. He paced. He sat. He stared. Every small sound, a dog barking, a car in the distance. A door closing made him jump. At 12, he called the neighbor's phone. The call went to voicemail. No message, nothing. His heart sank. He tried again at 12:30. Still nothing. A feeling of dread settled fully in his chest. He thought about what could happen if the neighbor did not come back. The promise of a few hours, the urgent request, now seemed like a trap. Time moved faster as the day approached midday. The sense of normalcy outside only heightened his anxiety. The bundle remained still, silent, mysterious. Every instinct screamed to either open it or throw it away. He could not do either. He thought about calling someone. Police? Family? But then what would he say? That he was holding a package for a neighbor who vanished before midday? That sounded strange, even to him. At 12:45, he sat down, feeling powerless. The house felt smaller, tighter. Shadows fell across the floor differently than earlier. Even familiar rooms felt foreign. He realized how little he knew about the neighbor, about the bundle, about what he had agreed to. The minutes dragged. The clock ticked. The bundle sat silently on the counter, heavier than ever. He could hear the distant hum of traffic now, more people moving through the neighborhood. Life continued outside, unaware of the tension inside. He thought about what could be inside the bundle. He imagined harmless things, small objects, forgotten tools, letters. But the images always turned darker. Fear shaped the mind in strange ways, make even small mysteries feel enormous. At 12:58, a sudden noise made him jump. Something had fallen in the neighbor's yard. He peered through the blinds, but the neighbor's house was empty again. No one. Just an ordinary street, quiet and still. He sank back into a chair, exhausted from the waiting, the pacing, the fear. Midday was nearly here, and he felt the weight of every minute pressing down. He realized he had been living in a constant state of alert for hours, anticipating something he could not define. At 12:59, he stood, walked to the cabinet, and stared at the bundle. Every instinct told him that things were about to change. Something was coming, something that would not be ignored. The clock ticked to 1 p.m., and in that instant, the quiet, tense morning, the waiting, the fear, all of it felt like it was about to explode into reality. By the time the clock edged past 1 p.m., the weight of the morning pressed down harder than ever. The bundle remained on the counter, unchanged, silent, yet somehow louder in his mind than the bustling street outside. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at it, trying to make sense of the events that had begun with a single knock at 5 a.m. The stillness was maddening. Every minute without news from the neighbor was a minute that twisted his stomach tighter. He tried to call again. The neighbor's phone rang and went straight to voicemail. The familiar voice that once reassured him in casual conversations was gone. Only silence met him, like a wall he could not climb. He hung up, running a hand over his face, trying to shake the tension. His thoughts spiraled. What if the neighbor had lied? What if this was more than a simple favor? The fear that he had been dragged unknowingly into something serious gnawed at him. He could not remember ever feeling so exposed, so unsure of reality. He glanced at the bundle again. Its shape was nothing remarkable, but in the quiet of his kitchen, seemed to radiate the weight of secrets. He decided he needed information. He walked out to the street, careful to keep an eye on his neighbor's house. Curtains remained drawn. No sign of movement. Every familiar sound, the distant hum of cars, the wind in the trees, birds chirping, felt intrusive and threatening. Normal life continued, but he was trapped in a bubble of anxiety. He decided to ask someone nearby. Another neighbor, older, someone who knew the street better, might know if something had happened. He walked slowly down the sidewalk, passing houses that were lively and quiet in turns. He knocked gently on the older neighbor's door. A face appeared, weary and surprised at the unexpected visit. "Good afternoon," he said cautiously. "Have you seen our neighbor today? He hasn't come out, and I haven't been able to reach him." The older neighbor frowned, brows furrowing. "Now that you mention it, I haven't seen him all morning. Usually, he's outside by now." A pause followed, long enough to make him uneasy. "Did anything happen?" he asked, voice low. The older neighbor shook the head. "Not that I know of, but he's been acting odd lately. Kept to himself more than usual. Sometimes I see him talking on the phone, looking worried, but nothing serious ever happens here." He thanked the older neighbor and walked back home. The words haunted him. Acting odd. Looking worried. The careful neighbor he thought he knew was not what he seemed. Was this worry connected to the bundle? To the sudden, early morning visit? The questions piled up. Back in the kitchen, he moved the bundle again. It seemed to have gained weight in the last hour, if only in his perception. Every tiny sound, his breathing, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock felt magnified. He could almost hear it whispering, almost feel it urging him to act, though he did not know how. He sat down and tried to distract himself. His computer called to him. Work tasks awaited. Emails piled up. A client needed updates. He stared at the screen, but the words blurred. Concentration was impossible. His mind replayed the neighbor's eyes, the tremor in the voice, the nervous glance down the street. That face and those eyes haunted him more than any image on the screen. An hour passed, or maybe more. He could not tell. The hands of the clock moved, but time had lost meaning. Each tick was a drumbeat of anticipation. The morning stretched into early afternoon, and the absence of the neighbor gnawed at him. A cold, helpless fear settled in the pit of his stomach. He realized he was completely unprepared for what might come. The thought of opening the bundle crossed his mind. A glance, just a peek, could provide answers. But something told him it was not just curiosity. It was a trap. The bundle was a mystery, and curiosity could be dangerous. He took a deep breath and stepped away from the counter, pacing instead. Each step seemed to echo louder than it should. At around 2 p.m., he noticed a small envelope tucked between the tiles on the counter. It hadn't been there before. He picked it up with trembling hands. There was no writing, no return address, just a note inside. Don T. Panic. Everything will be clear soon. Trust yourself. The message should have reassured him, but it did the opposite. It felt cryptic, alarming. Who left it? Was it the neighbor? Or someone else entirely? His pulse quickened. Fear and confusion mingled into something he could barely name. He sat down again, reading and rereading the note. Each time, it felt like a test he was failing. He thought about calling the authorities, but what could he tell them? That a neighbor had sent him a strange bundle early in the morning and vanished? That a cryptic note appeared out of nowhere? It sounded absurd. Yet, he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down. If the neighbor needed help, he had no choice but to wait. Minutes crawled by. He kept checking the window, hoping to see some sign, some movement, anything that would explain the silence. But the neighbor's house remained shut, blinds drawn tight. He noticed small details, the tilt of a flower pot, the newspaper still on the doorstep. Life moved slowly outside, indifferent to the tension inside. By mid-afternoon, he realized he could not ignore what was happening any longer. The mystery of the bundle, the neighbor's strange behavior, and the cryptic note were all connected. He needed to prepare for whatever came next. He cleared the counter, making space around the bundle. He checked doors and windows, ensuring nothing could disrupt him. He felt like a sentinel, guarding a secret that might explode at any moment. He tried to understand the neighbor's mind. What could have caused such fear? Was it danger, or just a personal problem spiraling out of control? The uncertainty gnawed at him. He remembered every small interaction with the neighbor over the years. Nothing seemed suspicious back then. Every smile, every polite conversation now seemed layered with hidden meanings. Around 3 p.m., his phone buzzed again. An unknown number. He hesitated but answered. A voice, distorted slightly, spoke. "You're not in danger yet. Stay calm. Help is on the way." Then the line went dead. He stared at the phone, heart pounding. Who had called? How did they know he had the bundle? Was it the neighbor or someone else? Fear, confusion, and curiosity collided inside him, making it hard to think clearly. He paced, trying to keep control. Each small sound, the refrigerator humming, a car passing, a bird landing on the windowsill, made him jump. He felt isolated, like the day had split in two. Outside, the world carried on, but inside, time had frozen, stretching into a tense, uncertain afternoon. He remembered the earlier conversation with the older neighbor, acting odd, looking worried. Those subtle hints now seemed like pieces of a puzzle he was only beginning to see. He realized the neighbor's life was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. And somehow, the bundle, the early visit, and the cryptic note were all part of it. By 4 p.m., the anxiety had transformed into determination. He could not sit passively anymore. He had to be ready for whatever was coming. He moved the bundle to the center of the kitchen table, placing it under better light. He examined it carefully, feeling the contours, the shape, trying to imagine what it might contain without opening it. Every detail seemed meaningful. The folds of the cloth, the way it sat, the subtle weight, it all felt like a message he had yet to understand. He prepared himself for anything. The day had shifted from ordinary to uncertain, and he realized he could not undo it. Whatever had begun with a knock at 5 a.m. was unfolding now, and he was right in the middle. The neighbor's absence, the silent bundle, the cryptic note, and the mysterious phone call all pointed to something larger than he had anticipated. As the afternoon light began to fade, he stood by the window, watching shadows stretch across the street. Every instinct told him the day was far from over, that the answers or consequences were coming. He felt the tension tighten, ready to snap, and in that quiet, uneasy moment, he understood something important. By agreeing to help, by taking the bundle, he had crossed a line. He had entered a story not of his choosing, and there was no turning back. The truth was beginning to surface, and soon, everything would change. By late afternoon, the day had transformed from ordinary to chaotic, though no one on the street seemed aware of it. Inside the house, tension thickened like the fading sunlight streaming through the blinds. The bundle on the kitchen table seemed impossibly still, yet its presence pressed on him like a living thing. Every noise, the distant hum of cars, a dog barking, footsteps on the sidewalk echoed too loudly, reminding him that time was moving and the neighbor had yet to appear. He tried calling again. The phone rang and went straight to voicemail. No messages. Silence answered him, filling the space with unease. The thought that something might have gone wrong settled heavily in his chest. The day that began with a simple knock at 5 a.m. was now spiraling into uncertainty, fear, and the unknown. Around 4:30, he decided he needed more information. He grabbed his keys and stepped outside, looking toward the neighbor's house. The blinds remained drawn. The front door was still closed. The yard was empty. No lights, no movement. It was unusual. He started walking down the street, hoping to see someone, anyone who might know something. Each step felt heavier than the last. He met another neighbor halfway down the block. This person noticed his anxious expression immediately. "Have you seen him today?" he asked, voice low. The neighbor shook the head. "No, I thought he was just taking it easy today." "Why? Did something happen?" He hesitated. How much should he say? He did not want to sound paranoid. "He had to leave something with me this morning," he said carefully. "He promised he'd come back, but he hasn't. No one can reach him." The other neighbor's eyes widened slightly. "That is strange. I haven't seen him since last night. Are you sure he's okay?" The word struck him like a hammer. "Are you sure he's okay?" He could not answer. The truth was, he had no idea. Fear was already creeping into panic. He returned home, heart racing. The bundle waited silently on the table. He tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe the neighbor had stepped out briefly. Maybe everything was fine. But the irrational thoughts kept creeping in. What if something had happened on the way? What if he was involved in something dangerous? The weight of the unknown was suffocating. By 5, the uncertainty became unbearable. He paced the room, checking windows, doors, and the counter. The bundle seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. He glanced at it, imagining the neighbor's face that morning, eyes wide, voice trembling. Something about that fear had been real. Something about the neighbor's life had been unraveling, and he had been pulled into the middle of it. Then he heard a sound, a soft rustling from the neighbor's yard. He ran to the window, heart pounding. Through the blinds, he saw a figure crouched low, moving quickly toward the back of the house. It was the neighbor, looking more disheveled than ever. Clothes wrinkled, hair messy, eyes darting. He ran outside, calling the neighbor's name. The neighbor froze, then turned toward him, a mixture of relief and panic on the face. Quickly, the neighbor said, voice urgent, "We need to move this. Come with me." He glanced back at the bundle. "What is happening? Why didn't you come back earlier?" The neighbor shook the head. "No time. Just trust me. It's not safe here." They moved quickly, the bundle cradled in his arms. The neighbor led him down the street, whispering directions. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound amplified. He felt like a character in a story he had never wanted to be part of. Caught in a day that had begun as ordinary and now spun wildly out of control, half a block away. The neighbor stopped, looking around nervously. "We need to hide it for now," the neighbor said. "Some people are watching." "They shouldn't find it." "Watching who?" he asked, heart racing. The neighbor did not answer directly. "It doesn't matter. Just follow instructions. Trust me. Keep it hidden, and everything will be okay." They ducked into a small alley behind a row of houses. The neighbor pointed to a hollow space beneath a set of wooden pallets. "Put it here. Make sure no one can see it." He placed the bundle carefully, ensuring it was out of sight. He felt a rush of fear and relief at the same time. The day had moved from uneasy waiting to frantic action in a matter of minutes. The neighbor looked exhausted. "We need to split up for a while. Don't leave the area. I'll come back soon, and then everything will be clear." "Clear?" he asked, but the neighbor only nodded and disappeared down another street, moving quickly and looking over his shoulder. Alone, he stood in the alley, heart pounding. The bundle was hidden, yet the anxiety remained. He realized that the day had already changed irrevocably. A simple knock at 5 a.m. had led to a series of events that he could not have predicted. The neighbor, usually predictable and calm, had been pulled into something dangerous, and now he was part of it too. Time passed slowly. Every rustle, every distant shout, every car that passed felt magnified. The bundle sat hidden, silent, but the tension surrounding it was almost tangible. He thought about the morning, the early knock, the urgent request, the cryptic note, and the mysterious call. It all fit together now, like pieces of a puzzle, but the picture it formed was still unclear. Around 6, he decided he needed to return home, to regroup, to think. He walked back carefully, eyes scanning the street, senses heightened. Everything seemed ordinary again, but he knew better. The ordinary had been a mask, hiding a day that had turned into chaos back in the kitchen. He checked the cabinets, windows, doors. Everything seemed in order, yet he could not shake the feeling that danger was near. The hidden bundle waited silently, a reminder of the morning and the uncertainty that had grown into something almost unbearable. He sat down at the table, exhausted, and tried to piece together the events. The day had started with a knock, a simple request for help. By late afternoon, it had escalated into fear, secret hiding, and mysterious warnings. Each moment had built on the last, creating a web he could not escape. He thought about the neighbor. What had caused such fear? What had forced the neighbor to act this way? The questions were heavy, but answers were few. He realized that whatever was happening, it was bigger than either of them had anticipated. The morning's urgency had evolved into a complex, dangerous situation. The clock was ticking. By evening, the first stars began to appear in the sky. The street looked calm, peaceful, but he knew better. He checked the bundle one last time, ensuring it remained hidden and safe. He realized that the day had changed both of them. The neighbor, forced into desperate action, and himself. Drawn into a story he had not asked for. He sat back, heart still racing, and reflected on the chain of events. A single knock, a simple favor, a promise each, had seemed minor in isolation. Together, they had created a day that would not be forgotten. A day where the ordinary became dangerous and the familiar turned uncertain. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. He knew the night would be long, full of questions and unease. But he also knew he had acted. He had hidden the bundle, followed instructions, and stayed alert. The neighbor would return, and when he did, perhaps the mystery would unravel. Perhaps the truth would finally be clear. For now, he could only wait, heart pounding, senses sharp, aware that by late afternoon, everything had already fallen apart. The day that began with a simple knock had grown into a complex, tense story, and there was no turning back. Night had fully fallen by the time he returned to his house. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint smell of evening dew. Street lights flickered, casting soft pools of light that barely touched the shadows of the empty street. He moved cautiously, senses still heightened from the afternoon. The bundle, hidden hours ago, remained untouched in the alley, waiting silently. Quiet reminder of the day that had spiraled out of control. He stepped inside, locked the door, and exhaled deeply. Every muscle in his body was tight, a lingering effect of adrenaline and fear. The house felt heavy, filled with quiet memories of ordinary mornings that now seemed impossibly far away. He looked at the clock. The evening had arrived, but there was no sign of the neighbor. Questions that had started at 5 a.m. now pressed in from all directions. What had begun as a simple favor had become a story of unknown stakes. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the space where the bundle had rested before he had hidden it. The note from earlier in the day lingered in his mind. Don't panic. Everything will be clear soon. Trust yourself. Those words felt both comforting and mocking. He had followed the instructions, yet clarity remained out of reach. He had done what was asked, but the day's events left him exhausted, tense, and uneasy. Minutes passed. He tried to focus on ordinary things, checking emails, tidying the kitchen, even making a small dinner. But his mind kept returning to the bundle, to the neighbor, to the uncertain events that had unfolded in the last 12 hours. Each memory came with a weight, pressing on him in ways that were hard to describe. A sudden knock at the door made him jump. He hesitated, heart hammering. Could it be the neighbor finally returning? He approached slowly, peeking through the peephole. The neighbor stood there, hair messy, eyes tired but alive. Relief washed over him, mingled with lingering anxiety. He opened the door cautiously. "You're back," he said, voice tight. "Is everything okay?" The neighbor gave a small, tired smile. "Yes, it's over now. I had to make sure it was safe for both of us. Thank you for following through." The words brought a strange mix of relief and lingering unease. The neighbor seemed calmer, but the exhaustion in the eyes spoke volumes. Something serious had happened, something beyond casual understanding. The neighbor had carried the burden alone. They moved together to the alley. The bundle waited, hidden and silent. The neighbor carefully retrieved it, inspecting the cloth and tape. "I shouldn't have involved you like this," the neighbor said quietly. "I didn't know who else to trust. You didn't deserve this stress." He shook his head. I didn't know what was going on. I was scared. I still don't know what was in there." The neighbor nodded, eyes heavy. "It's not something I can explain yet, but it's over. No one was hurt. That's all that matters." He followed the neighbor back to the house, still tense. The mystery of the day had begun to resolve, but the weight of the experience lingered. Each step toward normalcy was cautious, measured, as if one wrong move could bring the chaos back. Inside, the neighbor carefully placed the bundle on a counter, inspecting it one last time. Then, finally, The cloth was removed. Inside were ordinary things, papers, old letters, and small personal items. Nothing dangerous, nothing illegal. The relief hit him in waves. The morning's fear, the afternoon's tension. The evening's anxiety had all been caused by a personal emergency, a series of miscommunications and the neighbor's own worry. He exhaled deeply. The mystery was resolved, but the day had left its mark. He realized how easily ordinary life could be disrupted by small, urgent events, by trust and responsibility, by the unknown decisions of people around him. He thought about the knock at 5 a.m., the nervous voice, the pleading eyes. Those moments had felt monumental at the time, and in a sense, they had been. They had reshaped his understanding of trust, fear, and human connection. The neighbor looked at him, a mixture of apology and gratitude in the eyes. "I'm sorry you had to go through this. I didn't anticipate the stress. I needed help, and you were the only person I could ask." He nodded, still processing. "I just hope you're okay now. That's what matters." The neighbor gave a tired laugh. "Yes, I think so. And I owe you more than I can explain. You stayed calm, followed instructions, and kept everything safe. That was more than I could hope for." They sat together in the kitchen, letting the quiet settle. Outside, the night was calm. The streetlights cast soft shadows, the distant sounds of cars and birds had faded. Inside, the tension of the day slowly unraveled, leaving only reflections, lessons, and a deep appreciation for ordinary moments. He thought about the day's events, how quickly life could change, how a single knock, a small request, and a promise could lead to a cascade of fear and responsibility. How trust, even in someone you thought you knew well, could carry immense weight. And how human connection, even in its simplest forms, could guide people through uncertainty. The neighbor finally spoke again. "I promise, tomorrow will be normal. No surprises, no early knocks, no hidden bundles." He smiled faintly, understanding that the day had been extraordinary in its ordinariness. The morning's panic, the afternoon's tension, and the evening's resolution had changed them both. Life would return to normal, but with new understanding, new caution, and new respect for the unpredictable nature of human relationships. He realized that the day would stay with him, not as a tale of danger or excitement, but as a story of trust, fear, and the quiet strength of ordinary people facing unexpected challenges. The neighbor, once a simple presence in his life, had revealed vulnerability, urgency, and a need for help that had been hidden behind polite conversation. The evening passed slowly. They shared a simple meal, quiet and reflective. Conversation was minimal, comfortable, filled with the weight of shared experience. Outside, the neighborhood returned to its peaceful rhythm, unaware of the day's extraordinary chain of events. As he prepared for bed, he glanced at the clock. The hands pointed to 10 p.m., the day that had begun with a strange knock, a nervous request, and a heavy bundle had ended quietly, without further chaos. He felt a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and lingering awareness that life could shift in a single moment, and that even ordinary neighbors might carry extraordinary stories behind closed doors. He turned off the lights, letting the quiet of the night fill the room. Sleep came slowly, but with it, a sense of resolution. The neighbor was safe, the bundle was returned, and the lessons of the day were clear. Trust, caution, and the human connection between them had carried them through a day that had begun as ordinary and ended as unforgettable. In the silence, he realized that some moments, no matter how brief or confusing, could change everything. A simple knock at 5 a.m. had reminded him of the fragility of routine, the importance of trust, and the weight of responsibility. And as he drifted into sleep, he understood that life's unpredictability was not just a challenge, but a reminder of the depth and resilience of human connection.